Hello, my name is Linda Saunders-Paquette. I serve as the Executive Director of New Futures. New Futures is a nonprofit organization located in Concord, and we work to reduce alcohol and other drug problems in New Hampshire by focusing on public policy. Welcome to our TV show, the New Futures TV show that we are producing in partnership with Concord Community TV. And we're going to be focusing on issues related to substance abuse in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is experiencing an epidemic of substance abuse. All you have to do is pick up your daily paper and read headlines about heroin overdoses, opiate addiction, underage drinking parties, and you know we have a significant problem in our state. We also have very alarming statistics about the nature of the problem here. 1 in 10 New Hampshire citizens is in need of substance use treatment. We have some of the highest rates of underage alcohol and other drug use in the country. And sadly, New Hampshire is second to last in the country when it comes to a person in need of treatment being able to access it. But in the face of those sobering statistics, there's also some good news. And the good news is that people can recover from addiction and lead successful, productive, and happy lives. So today we're going to focus on recovery from addiction. And I'm happy to welcome here today 2 people who are in long-term recovery from addiction. To my immediate right is Cheryl Coletti, and next to Cheryl is Melissa Cruz. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So let's have a little conversation about recovery, what it means, and start with some of the basics. So for the people who are watching, what is addiction, and what does addiction mean to you?
Well, addiction is a chronic relapse. It's a brain disease. It's the abnormal need or harmful use of something. And specifically today we're talking about addiction, of substance abuse, alcohol, drugs. So that's simply what it is.
And was that your experiences? Did you have addiction in your family?
Personally, that was my experience, yes.
Mine also definitely runs in my family. It is a controversial debate, I believe, among people in and out of recovery. My personal experience was it is rampant in my family, running back many generations.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if you could also explain what is recovery?
For me, recovery is actually returning to a normal state after a harmful period of time. Today, as we're talking about recovery, we're talking about recovery from substance abuse. So recovery is the successful, sustainable lifestyle without the use of alcohol or other mind-altering substances.
And for you, Melissa, what is recovery?
Well, if addiction for me was not having the tools to be able to stop doing something I wanted to do, recovery has been, for me, having the open-mindedness, willingness to learn new tools, to find a way to not do the thing that I was not able to stop doing. So it's been about learning new tools, new way of life, being open-minded and willing to try new things, learn new things, and continue. It's a lifestyle, I guess it was the lifestyle.
Now, is there a difference between treatment and recovery? And if there is, what is that difference?
Yeah, treatment is, from my perspective, treatment is the pathway to recovery. Recovery is, as Melissa said, a sustainable lifestyle, a viable lifestyle. The treatment is the pathway to recovery. There are many different pathways for treatment. We've seen treatment in terms of a medical detox, in terms of a 28-day program. There is treatment.
When you say a 28-day program, what do you mean by that? Is that a residential type of a program where you go into a residential facility and spend 28 days, or can that be done on an outpatient basis, for example?
It can be done inpatient or outpatient, and that depends on the nature of the individual, I would say the severity of the individual's addiction, available resources for individuals. That's another whole topic. So you have those programs. There are 12-step programs. There are programs which are peer-to-peer recovery. There are harm reduction programs. So there are a number of treatment programs out there, some more successful than others, I think depending on the individual, that ultimately get you to a life of recovery.
So in the communities and 12-step communities or in any type of recovery community, they support each other by holding each other accountable, teaching each other different methods to deal with their daily life and disappointment and failure and shame, guilt, remorse, all the things that kept me wanting to continue to use.
And there are thousands and thousands of people in New Hampshire in recovery. And it's my understanding that, you know, folks really support each other in sustaining that recovery. And the relationships that you build in the recovery community are critical to helping sustain that recovery.
Yeah, it is important. It is critical. It's a community unto itself. It's a community that understands the challenge, understands the struggle, understands that it isn't a situation that you deal with and check the box and keep moving. So it's almost like dealing with other lifetime diseases. Diabetes is an example, heart disease. So it's a community that supports one another, understanding all the different components of that recovery process.
And a person who's suffering from the disease of addiction, and that disease can also affect family members too. Are there supports available for family members of folks who are suffering from the disease of addiction?
There are many different support groups available throughout New Hampshire. You know, there are 12-step groups, there are spiritual groups, church groups. There are a lot of family-oriented groups that support each other. It's a terrible burden on a family when someone you love is struggling with addiction, has the disease. It can pull whole families apart.
So you've sort of led into my next question, which is what are some of the challenges that people in recovery face trying to sustain their recovery?
I would say some of the challenges that they face are resources first to get from addiction to recovery. So there's a need for resources. We, as you alluded to earlier in your opening statement, we're the second to the last state in the country to be able to provide those services and resources. But yet we're one of the highest states in substance abuse. So it's a disproportionate relationship. So that's a challenge right there. The other challenge, at least as I see it, is folks that are still suffering from addiction, not understanding what recovery looks like, and not feeling comfortable with their addiction and the recovery process. That's one of the reasons that I'm willing to speak about my long-term recovery, because my hope is to give those folks the idea of what recovery looks like.
And Melissa, what are your thoughts on challenges for folks who were in recovery?
I would say some of the biggest challenges that I have seen are housing and employment issues. Often someone new in recovery, they've lost their job, they've lost where they live, their place to live, and that's a big challenge. I mean, those are big issues that can really take someone back out if they're not surrounded with the resources, like Cheryl said, and or at least brought to the resources or helped find the resources that can help them either find a place to live or a job. I think employment and housing are probably two of the biggest that I see.
So people who are
face.
suffering from addiction are often discriminated against, for sure. And there's some, I think, negative connotations about that because I think the general public may not understand that addiction is in fact a disease. Are there things that employers could do to help support people who are in recovery?
Sure. I mean, I want to step back one second when you talk about the negative connotation. I think it's fear. I think it's fear that develops that negative connotation because this is an issue. Addiction is an issue, as Melissa said earlier, when it affects the whole family. It affects community. It raises, criminal rates. So I think there's a fear around the addiction with not knowing about it. So I think to be able to step back and say, what is it that we can do as a community for awareness, and then to give those folks the resources will help break down that fear.
Great.
I would say to learn more about addiction. I just had an employer, a friend of mine who is a large employer in Manchester, call me, and someone had confided in him that they had a problem, and he was able to reach out to me. He knew I was in recovery, and I was able to call him, hook him up with somebody that could get him to the resources. And so just him knowing about addiction and having an open mind about it, he's able to help his employee, because we are some of the best, hardest workers if we're given the opportunity and held accountable for our actions. I mean, that has to happen too. But then if they take it the step further and offer the support, then they can often get their great employee back in better shape.
That's great. So how can people in recovery impact public policy in New Hampshire?
Well, I think, there is, again, one of the reasons to come out and speak about recovery, not only because it's important for the still sick and suffering to understand that there's hope, that they can see a face in recovery, in long-term recovery, like Melissa, like myself, and others, but also there's a need for a voice in advocacy, in public policy. Someone once said to me, you're either at the table or you're on the table. And I think without a voice, we're on the table, which means any funding that's available, any resources, we aren't able to access unless we have a voice. So I think that's really important, and I think it's important for people to understand and see, as Melissa said earlier, people in recovery who are successful, who are leaders, who can advocate in the right way. It's important that people that make those decisions for policy, for funding, see the recovery community as viable, as voters, as people of influence.
Great.
I would agree. We do become productive, healthy, useful voting citizens, and the more people in long-term recovery that are willing to speak about their recovery and let our numbers will grow, and we'll be able to affect public policy rather than sitting in our places where we're recovering in our communities and complaining that we're not getting the services and resources we deserve. We can do advocacy training with you at New Futures. We can learn about how we can actually affect public policy.
Great. Well, you've talked a little bit about resources for people who are seeking to achieve recovery. I don't know if there are any other resources you want to talk about, but my question is also, how do people access those resources?
I mean, the web, the internet is a great resource. Your website is a great resource.
Which is New
Futures.
New-futures.com.
There you go.
And we'll put some information up about that at the end of the program.
Yeah, there are a lot of 12-step programs. There's AA, NA, OA, a lot of different 12-step programs that are very good support for people. In terms of resources, I think the internet is the best resource.
Yeah, if you're talking about a medical detox or a 28-day residential program or outpatient program, you know, those resources, or at least the exposure to those resources, are available through, you know, you have the Farnham Center in Manchester, you have your local hospitals that are there to at least provide the resource as far as information to people. You know, the more folks come out and speak about recovery, the more that people will be aware of who in the community they can turn to. So it might not be knowing where to go, but knowing who to speak to. And that's another, in my opinion, another real important reason for at least speaking about recovery. Linda, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. It's exciting to hear about New Futures and the opportunities for recovery. I think there is a movement that can be felt in the state for recovery. We are one of the lagging states in the recovery movement. And I think the recovery movement will help us improve our substance abuse programs in the state. I think it will give folks who are, as I've said earlier, still sick and suffering, the understanding that there is a life in recovery once you identify the pathway to recovery. And I think the voices of recovery can help in policy, in public policy, in advocacy, and I think that's necessary. So the opportunity to sit here with you today, the reason I'm willing to come out and speak publicly about my long-term recovery, which for me means I haven't had to have a drink in over 2 years, it's important. It's important. So thank you for having us here today.
Well, thank you. You know, we hear so much about the tragedy of addiction. And I think we don't hear enough about the hope of recovery. And so thank you both for being here today and sharing that hope around recovery. I really appreciate it. I also want to say, please tune in to the shows we will be producing here with Concord Community TV. We're going to be talking about a lot of topics related to alcohol and drug issues in New Hampshire. And if you have an idea for a topic you would like to see discussed on our show, please contact New Futures, and the information will be shown at the end of this program. Thank you very much.